Welcome back to the home front. I'm your host, Reed Galen. Today, I'm once again joined by journalist and reporter Abigail Tracy. You probably know her from Inc. magazine and Vanity Fair. And she is a lady about town doing things at the United Nations and other fanciness. But today, Abby, I want to talk about here we are as we're recording this, 4 weeks away from Election Day. And before we started recording, you mentioned something that I think if you spend enough time in this world doing this, which is even with everything going on, we get into sort of the recycle bin of political stories that it's hard to know something new and different about Donald Trump, although I'm going to refer to something here in a few minutes. And it's hard to know more about Kamala Harris. I'm sure there is from a policy perspective, but really what happens is that the political media, the political insiders, the elite, everybody sort of gets into this. I'd almost call it a rhythm. So give us your sense of why that happens and what rhythm are we in right now?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think just taking the 30,000-foot view on this race to begin with,
Mm-hmm.
it was always going to come down to a handful of states, roughly like seven
Mm-hmm.
battleground states that are really
Right.
going to determine the outcome of the election.
Right.
And when you're looking at those are really, the quote unquote blue wall states. So Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and then the Sun Belt states. So North Carolina, Arizona, Georgia, and Nevada.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you're looking at those states, like really I think obviously once Joe Biden dropped out of the race and then Harris entered, there was some shifting in the polls. You saw her surge. You kind of saw her catch up to Trump, eclipse him in some of these states. A New York Times poll that came out today actually had her ahead of Trump nationally. But really, I think we've almost reached something of a stasis, like a month out from the election right now, because, you know, everything that kind of got shooken up by Biden dropping out and people, accepting Harris as the new Democratic nominee, things have sort of leveled. And right now, what you're seeing is just the two of them neck and neck across all of these states. And I don't know at this point how much we're really going to see in terms of shifting of those numbers. Obviously, you and I have talked a lot about the fact that people know Trump, people know who he is, what he stands for, and not much of that is changing. I think there was this initial sort of learning curve in terms of voters getting to know Harris a bit more.
Right.
Obviously, folks still are because, she's still a little bit more of an unknown quantity than Trump. But like, really, I think we're hitting a point where most voters like either know or they don't know. And if they don't know, they're probably not going to vote. But I don't know.
Right.
That's kind of my sense as to, the moment that we're in, sort of the snapshot in time, so to speak.
Right. And, I think that thinking about being an old advance man and being on the road in 2000 in particular is, as you know, as someone who's probably sat on more than your fair share of press risers, that, when you're going to rally after rally after rally, there's a stump speech, right? That's given. Maybe there's an insert at the top for where you are and the acknowledgments of local leaders and local supporters. Um, but for the most part, if you're on the road with the campaign, you're not going to hear much different. And the difference I think with Trump is that you're not going to hear much different. But if you do, it's always more insane. But even then, I think some of your colleagues, as we've seen over almost a decade, become almost inured to it, right? Which
Mhm.
is like he said something crazy again today. Here's the crazy thing, and then on the receiving end, right? The listeners, the viewers, the voters are like, he said another crazy thing. And for me, it's always going back to Bob Dole, like, where's the outrage? But
Mhm.
we do get worn down. And I think that as we see, I was talking to Adam Kinzinger yesterday, is this is what happens when you're 9 years into somebody like a Donald Trump. Is he just the human psyche is not capable of continually defending itself over and over and over again because it's not new, right? And the truth
Mhm.
is that the reason why he even ever had a chance is what I call the discount rate, Abby, which is he's been a public asshole for 50 years. It's not
Right.
like people writ large from coast to coast, up and down, old and young, Republican and Democrat didn't know what the shtick was. In fact, he made a career of it. It was his career. He's not any different now than he was when he was pretending to be a CEO on The Apprentice or when he was pretending to be the CEO of the Trump organization, right? It's all just been shtick. It's all been an act. It's all been one thing after another he learned at the hand of, Roy Cohn or whoever it was. And so now it's like, what do you want to do? And as I mentioned to you, when I was in Grand Rapids talking to a gentleman in a predominantly black neighborhood, he said, Trump's all about power, and I don't like that. But I don't really know about Kamala Harris, but she's the lesser of two evils. So I guess I'll probably vote for her. But that's like for someone who like spends all day, every day on this, you're like, this is where we are. Even
Hmm.
now, to your point, 4 weeks out, that's
Hmm.
what a soft Democratic voter, but longtime Democratic registrant thinks. Kamala
Hmm.
Harris is the lesser of two evils, which I think is a broader discussion that we need to have as a country, after we get through Trump on November 5th. But let's talk about something that you brought up. So this morning, you sent me an article about the idea that Elon Musk and his new DeSantis powered get out the vote operation is partnering with Turning Point USA, which is the pumpkin headed Charlie Kirk's scam to get
Hmm.
out the vote in Wisconsin. So tell us a little bit about what they're up to.
Yeah, so really, it seems as though this Elon Musk backed PAC, called America PAC, I believe is the name, partnered
Original.
up with, yeah, very good, right? Yeah, patriotic. Partnered up with Charlie Kirk's Turning Point USA PAC. So Charlie Kirk, that was kind of like, I guess, how would you describe it, Reed? Sort of this like conservative college incubator of sorts is sort of how Turning Point started.
Yeah,
And now,
it was really the next iteration of Young Americans for Freedom, or any group like that. The Republicans have really been working on a youth movement of one sort of or another since really the 1964 Goldwater campaign.
mhm,
And Charlie Kirk was just the next person that sort of got involved in the Leadership Institute and all these other conservative think tanks and front groups and really took fire and got involved with Trump very early on. From suburban Chicago, didn't go to college, ironically enough, but spends a lot of time on college campuses trying to recruit younger voters. And I think he's probably had some real purchase with younger white men. I
mhm,
think it's also creepy that this is a guy who's now well entrenched in his 30s and is still spending a lot of time on college campuses, right? Probably too much time.
mhm.
Look, I was at Duke a couple of weekends ago, and like these kids, they are kids to me, Abby, are young enough to be my children,
Well,
right? And so
I
like
hope they
I'm
feel like kids since they are. Yeah.
yeah, I am very much like I could be their dad, I could be a professor, but I am certainly not one of them, if that makes
Hmm.
sense. And I think that Kirk's creepiness comes from the fact that he's still trying to like be, like Steve Buscemi in the Adam Sandler movie. Hello, fellow kids. Like it's
Right.
enough already. But I think
Hmm.
it also speaks to the fact that they see that they are not doing well, that they want to take Musk's money and
Yeah.
the idea of Kirk's ability theoretically to turn out younger white voters. I think more men than women, but I think there's also probably some young conservative women. Because the truth is that the Wisconsin Republican Party is a shambles. It's a disaster.
Hmm.
Under governors like Tommy Thompson or even Scott Walker, it was very well organized. But now it's a debacle, and a lot of that is Trump's own making, which is that he told voters in 2020 and then again in 2022, you know,
Hmm.
don't use vote by mail, don't use early voting, which were
Right.
really the standards by which Republican campaigns won in many of these places because they had so fine tuned their targeting that they were very, very efficient. And so now I think what you're seeing is that this is a signal that, oh gosh, we are probably behind in Wisconsin. We need to
Hmm.
go generate a lot of enthusiasm in those exurbs in rural areas. But the problem, too, Abby, just from a logistical and political perspective, is that, as I understand it, the DeSantis people that they brought on, Elon has brought on to do this, are using a lot of paid canvassers,
Hmm.
and that's one of those where it's like, if you're a volunteer, if you have come out for the Wisconsin Democratic Party or the union, our organization, You're doing it for free. You're doing it because you believe in it. If you're doing it because you're getting paid, like you'll show up, but it's not the same, right? I mean,
Hmm.
I have tried to utilize paid canvassers, and it's just not the same
Kind of
because
feels like telemarketers almost.
it is,
Yeah.
and
Hmm.
and then you have to like, can you keep track of them? Are they actually doing what they say they're going to do? And so it's all predicated on the idea that like someone is basically doing an hourly job to go out to strangers' houses and knock on the door. Again, that's hard enough to get people who believe in your cause to do. I think it's much harder if somebody's getting paid $15, $20 an hour. But I think
Hmm.
that's where they're probably trying to bring Kirk in to bring some organic energy into it. But interesting that they're doing it in Wisconsin.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think, notably again, Democratic governor now in Wisconsin. So you mentioned, the previous Republican governor. So kind of statewide, there's been a shift. Obviously, the Wisconsin Supreme Court also went Democratic.
Right.
But I think like it really is interesting because there was, I want to say, one of the articles I read about this partnership, so to speak, between, Musk's PAC, America, and Turning Point. They almost say that in the interview with one of the spokespeople for, I think it was Turning Point, told Politico, like, hey, yeah, we're partnering up, like buddying up with them so we can focus on Arizona. And I think in a way they're sort of showing the hand there, which is to
Right.
say they need this infrastructure. They need this support in places like Wisconsin, because I do think that they're being, outmanned on the ground by the Harris campaign and the bodies that they have in terms of their ground game. But so for them to say,
Right.
hey, yep, we're partnering up in Wisconsin, so then we can shift our resources and focus to Arizona, I think is interesting and kind of telling as to say, where their resources are going at this point, and also maybe the fact that they recognize that they need, a little bit more help and backing. And again, as you put it,
Mm.
Musk's money.
Yeah, I mean, I would say this. We should also note that Ben Wickler is the chairman of the Wisconsin Democratic Party, and he is about the best Democratic state chair that they have. He is an absolute rock star. He, if Harris wins, he should be the DNC chairman. He is someone who really understands what it takes to build an organization, not only statewide, but county by county and precinct by precinct. And it's not easy, Abby. It's not often glamorous work, right? And as you know, you go into every possible nook and cranny of whatever state it is, but in this case, Wisconsin. There are people who've been there a long time. There are people who have their own vested interests. And Wickler has done a good job of navigating all of that and bringing them all together. And frankly, giving the Harris campaign a very solid footing on the ground there. Now, let's talk about Arizona, too, because again, this is one of those things where I sometimes ask myself, does any of this matter? And I ask myself that sort of tongue in cheek, Abby, because in a state like Arizona, there are going to be people who vote for both Donald Trump and Ruben Gallego for U.S. Senate,
Mm-hmm.
right? Now, that's crazy town to me, but it's likely to happen because Carrie Lake is such a nut. She's such a nut that I couldn't even tell you, and I'll probably be wrong. I couldn't tell you the last time Trump was actually in the state. And
Mm-hmm.
I think it's
Mm-hmm.
because they're scared to death to stand next to Carrie Lake. Now think about that. Like, I'll vacuum the red carpet for Mr. Trump when he comes in, right? They know that being next to her attaches something that Trump gets away with, but she doesn't, if that makes sense. And I think also the other part about Arizona, just, and we're getting into the micro pieces of this, is one is that there's still a schism in the Republican Party there because of Donald Trump and Carrie Lake's awful comments about the late Senator John McCain, someone who I worked for. Jimmy McCain, I think, has endorsed Vice President Harris. But then there's also been a couple of articles out there about the idea that there's a pretty large Mormon contingent in Arizona,
Mm-hmm.
and that there are a lot of Mormons who are conservative, certainly, like a Rusty Bowers, who was the state assembly chair, or excuse me, speaker, um, who, they're no Democrats, they're no liberals, but they're no Donald Trump fans either. And I think this is one thing we saw in a state like Wisconsin that I think we could also see in a state like Arizona in the next 4 weeks is a lot of Republicans just leaving the president spot blank, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they vote for a Republican in the state house, maybe they vote for a Republican down ballot somewhere, but they're just going to leave it blank because he's just so antithetical to their values. We should remember that it was 4 years ago in a place called Bullhead City, Arizona, where Senator Mike Lee, my senator from here in Utah, compared Donald Trump to a Mormon hero, Captain Moroni. And it sent a shockwave through the LDS community because in their lore, Captain Moroni and Donald Trump don't exist in the same universe. And I don't think personally that there's a lot of folks who have ever forgiven Lee. Now he is just the worst there is. He's just we could do a whole episode on how much I dislike him. But I think Arizona is another place too, though, where you're seeing probably on college campuses like Arizona or Arizona State, where I do think that Kirk has spent a lot of time and energy trying to find those sort of fratty, guys and gals, right? They go to the football games, they do those, those dances on TikTok in front of their houses, all that. I think he's trying to find some places because, again, Trump can't afford to lose any votes. So
Right.
they're trying to go figure out where the hell these people are, where they're going to get them from, and somehow keep it competitive. Now, look, it is competitive. Don't get me wrong. But I think what you're seeing now is that a campaign that has to outsource its field operations to a goon like Charlie Kirk, to a kook like Elon Musk, and to two people that ran Ron DeSantis's operation who loathe you, like that's really bad. That's not a good thing to do politically, if that makes sense. Like that's like those are not the people you want to rely on to get out the vote for you.
Yes. Yes. It's not the A team, so to speak.
No, it's not the D team, right? I mean, Musk, let's just as an aside, like Musk went to the Butler, Pennsylvania rally with Trump. Was that over the weekend? Like he is really crazy.
He looked so his dancing on stage. I just don't.
Even Trump thinks he's a goon, right? Like you can tell. Even Donald Trump is like, "What's?" It was you know what? I'll tell you this. It was the same expression that Trump gave when Sarah Palin endorsed him. It was like, I need this person, but even me, Donald Trump, who is crazy, knows this person is off their frickin' rocker, right? Like, and you could tell, like that Trump likes to do his own goofy dance, but he was like, what's wrong with this guy? I think he probably feels the same way about Vance too. He's like, these guys are really weird. And I don't really like weird. Like I like weird like me. I don't like weird like them.
Well, I mean, Trump is all about optics, right? And all about branding. And you had Elon Musk jumping on stage in Butler, Pennsylvania, and he just looked like a dweeb. And it, birthed a million memes.
Right.
And that's exactly the type of thing that Donald Trump doesn't want. He's terrified of being mocked. He's terrified of being made fun of. And really, like, what happened was, Elon Musk did his weird little thing on stage, and then the internet turned on him in terms of, all of that. And again, like Trump, there are a few things Trump cares about. Optics is right at the top of the list.
Yeah.
Yep.
When I interviewed Kara Swisher a few months back, for her book about, her experience in the tech community, what we saw on stage was what she described, which is all of these guys, whether or not it's Musk or Zuckerberg or any of them, just playing out like whatever deficiencies they had as little boys, right? And he's clearly just desperate for attention. Didn't get enough from his mom, didn't get enough from his dad, right? And now he wants to take all this financial influence he has, turn it into social and political influence. The problem is that when people see him in real life, they're like, that guy's a weirdo and I want nothing to do with him. All right.
Right. I will say though about Musk, like one of the things is, yes, it's sort of easy to kind of make fun of his appearance on stage and sort of, how he presented, but there are also things that he's doing that are problematic and really troubling in a deep way. Obviously, with X and the way that he's using his platform that he owns, he's kind of managing the town square, so to speak, and is fully in the bag for Donald Trump, and he's floating potential assassination threats against Biden and Harris, though he, tried to walk it back as a joke. But then in an interview with Tucker Carlson, came back out and said, people don't want to assassinate a puppet. So it's just like, he deleted an initial, tweet, and then he reaffirmed that that kind of was what he believed. Like there are so many things, despite the fact that he looks like a dweeb, there are so many things that he's also doing that are really troubling in terms of sort of the discourse and the rhetoric.
No, I think you're absolutely right, and you're right. I should not underplay because you know what? And look, we made the same. You're hitting on something that I think is essential. We made the same mistake with Donald Trump, right? Oh, it's just a joke. He's just a clown. But the truth is when you go on Tucker Carlson's show, who is clearly a Russian agent, and you say this kind of stuff, right? Then you should take it seriously because if he were anybody else, as soon as he got off the air with Tucker Carlson, the next thing that would happen would be that his attorney would call and say the Secret Service wants to talk to you or the FBI wants to talk to you because you can't say stuff like that. And
Right.
I think also, just one thing, um, the other day in Pennsylvania, I think it was, Donald Trump said, if you're a Kamala Harris voter, don't tell anybody because bad things are going to happen to you. And I'll tell you, so I was at the Detroit airport when I saw that, and I did a little thing, and I just said, I'm a Kamala Harris voter. How about you? 3 seconds. And I posted
Hmm.
it. And the MAGAs went crazy in the
Mm.
comments, just bananas. And that, I'm going to knock on wood. I'm lucky enough not to get trolled that often, but it was fascinating, Abby, to see you're not a man, right? Are you a woman? Like, what does your husband have to say about like just one guy was like, I'm a straight white guy. What are you? So it's communism. I mean, just all of the stuff that when you just push back a little bit on
Hmm.
that, really just the immune response is truly incredible. But let's talk about Donald Trump. Let's talk about Russian agents. Let's talk about Donald Trump as maybe a Russian agent.
Oh,
So,
yes.
Peter Baker in the Washington Post this morning reported that Bob Woodward has another book coming out in which he says that Donald Trump, let's go back to 2020 and then we'll go to the start.
Yep.
Donald Trump made sure that Vladimir Putin got COVID tests at the very beginning of the pandemic, American COVID tests, because Putin was very, very concerned about picking up the virus. But he also was clear with Trump not to let anybody know about this because he thought it would be harmful to Trump's political instinct or political, you know, uh, his campaign, right? Because he was running
Hmm.
in 2020, his political prospects. Fast forward, he leaves office, but he's still talking to Vladimir Putin, right? Now, this Vladimir Putin, whether Donald Trump's the president or not, is not a fan or friend of the United States of America, right? He's
Hmm.
not. And it just goes to yet another question, Abby, of like, where is the line? Now, let's say that, he did this not in office. Well, the Supreme Court didn't say that Donald Trump could do whatever he wanted. He said he could do whatever he wanted under the concept of an official act. Well, if you're talking to a foreign leader, a foreign despot, right around the same time that your party is blocking aid to said dictator's main military opponent, where does that fit into it? Because to me, we're getting real close to like Richard Nixon 1968 stuff, right?
Hmm.
Keep up the fight. I'll do what I need to for for you on my end. Like this is again fundamentally un-American. It's not what presidents do. And we should not forget that in late 2016, Jared Kushner, Donald Trump's son-in-law, went to the Russian embassy to set up a back channel where he could talk to Vladimir Putin or someone within the Russian superstructure because he didn't want to be picked up by the National Security Agency talking to Russians before Trump had taken office. Like
Right.
guys, it's not a hoax. It's not a scam. They're into this. The Russians are going to amp up everything in the next few weeks, and this will only serve to fire up Trump and the people around him. And I'll just tell you, Abby, as someone who grew up in the 80s, as a proud American fighting the communists, fighting the Russians, right? Watching Red Dawn, like it's just amazing to me that even here we are, 9 years into the Trumpocene era, and yet half the country doesn't believe that he's in the pocket of Putin and these other guys.
Hmm. Well, it is remarkable. Woodward, well, according to Woodward's book, He's maybe spoken to him as many as 7 times since
Right.
21, which is a crazy amount for somebody who's not in office talking to a despot. And it's absolutely wild. And I think, to kind of put you know, a note on this, yesterday, US intelligence officials briefed reporters virtually, and they said that not only does, China, Iran, and Russia intend to kind of continue with the ongoing disinformation campaigns and kind
Right.
of undermine, you know, election integrity leading up to the November 5th election, but they
Right.
plan to do it afterward. They plan to
Right.
sow discord following the election, raising question around, who won, were the results, fair,
Right.
was the election quote unquote stolen? Like, this is, to your point, Russia's not a friend of the United States. Like, they're a foreign adversary that is actively interfering in our election processes. And then we have Donald Trump, one of the candidates, like presumably hopping on the phone with Putin. It's a crazy confluence of really like troubling revelations.
And we should remember that it was in 2020, it was Marco Rubio, Lil Marco in his fancy boots, as chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, whose report said that indeed that the Trump campaign and the Russians were too close for comfort, that there was definitely something going on there that should not have been going on. And we talk about the Mueller report. And again, I think that as we started at the top, so much of this, gets even in our own heads feels like retread stuff, that how many times can we think about this? But again,
Mm-hmm.
it's just one more example, and I say this to the people watching and listening, like, they're never going to stop. The bad guys won't stop. Whether or not it's the Leonard Leos of the world or the other MAGA folks, in the donor class that's supporting this, or the Russians or the Chinese or the Iranians. To your point, if Donald Trump wins, God forbid, then they will still do everything they can to help him. But that is necessarily bad for the individual American
Mm-hmm.
and the American people. If
Mm-hmm.
Kamala Harris wins, they will immediately set upon her as illegitimate. Right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what they will do, because this is how they do it. They play the long game, Abby, which is, if Harris wins, and let's say she wins by a lot, they need to make her so damaged that in 2028 or even 2026 in the midterms, right, that the political culture can continue to metastasize into this ugliness and unrecognizable thing. Because again, they're going to find a JD Vance or somebody else to run through the car wash, right, to try and take her out politically in
Mm-hmm.
2028, because they put too much time, effort, money, and everything else into this. And they know, unfortunately, like, Vladimir Putin's been in power for 20 years, whatever it is, 20 some years. Xi's not going anywhere. The mullahs aren't going anywhere, right? We're we're a democracy, right? Our politics and policy is on 2 and 4 year cycles, unfortunately. And unlike during the Cold War, where everybody was in agreement that, yes, capitalism versus communism, democracy versus totalitarianism, we don't have that now.
Mm-hmm.
And they understand that the fight is not necessarily just around the world, but in every heart and mind here in the United States. And there, we saw these results of people who say, I don't talk to this family member anymore. I don't talk to this
Mm-hmm.
friend anymore. It's ruined this relationship. I have that personally. And they're
Mm-hmm.
not going to stop. And I think that, as we've said, we've got 4 weeks to election day here. And, we're going to have the polls close. And we should assume that right before the polls close or right after the polls close, insanity will ensue. And I think it's up to all of us to ensure that if you can serve as a poll worker or a poll watcher in your state, regardless of where you live, you should do that. But also, if you see somebody, if you're dropping off a ballot or you see somebody mucking with a drop box, like, call the cops,
Mm-hmm.
right? Call the
Mm-hmm.
registrar, call the Secretary of State's office. Like, if you see something, guys, say something, right?
Mm-hmm.
The bad guys will do what they think they need to win. And remember, winning doesn't mean stealing votes, to Abby's point. It means
Right.
putting enough sand in the air, right, so that people don't really know what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think to that point, the goal, obviously, what we learned back in 2016 and 2020 was that, sure, Donald Trump was Putin's preferred candidate, of course, but ultimately, they're achieving their goal anytime that they're able to undercut trust or undermine, the faith in our democratic system and in our voting processes. As long as they're able to do that with, these disinformation campaigns, whether it's artificial intelligence, deep fakes, whatever, they're achieving their goal, even if
Mhm.
Harris is ultimately elected.
Right.
All they want is to sow discord because as long as our democracy is weakened, Russia is winning. And that really, and not just Russia, again, China, Iran as well, who the US officials have said are also interfering. That said, I don't know how close Trump is with any of the other leaders, but, if he's buddy buddy with Putin, that's obviously a problem.
Right.
But really, like, ultimately, even if Harris wins, as long as they can cause, distrust in the system, then they're winning and they're achieving their ultimate goal, which is to, undermine US democracy.
Right. And again, guys, we got a lot of work to do up until November 5th. And as soon as we're through this one. All right. Abby, as always, thanks for joining me. Before we let you go, where can our listeners and viewers, we're on YouTube now, find you on social media?
Yeah, so on X, formerly Twitter, I'm at Abigail Tracy, and on Instagram and Threads, I'm at Abby Tracy.
All right. As always, gang, you can find me on Twitter and TikTok at Reed Galen, on Threads and Instagram at Reed_Galen USA, on Substack, Apple, Spotify, and now YouTube, the home front, guys. I hope you'll check it out. Please subscribe. Also, go to jointheunion.us. That's jointheunion.us. Get involved, guys. Just got back from Michigan. I'm headed to Arizona in a little while. And speaking of Wisconsin, we just had a meeting this morning, guys. I will be in Wisconsin the entire last week of the campaign. We will keep you posted on what we're doing and where we're going to be. Until then, Abby, thanks for joining me.
Of course, thanks for having me.
And everybody else, we'll see you next time.